The tires crunched over the loose gravel, the sound vibrating up through the steering wheel and settling somewhere deep in my chest. The sky above the dashboard was a bruised purple, heavy with rain that hadn't fallen yet. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white, focusing on the rhythmic popping of stones against the undercarriage. I wasn't doing this for me. I was doing it because Mia's winter boots had a hole in the left sole, and I'd been stuffing it with folded cardboard for a week. The rent notice was taped to my fridge, a bright pink square of failure. The desperation was a physical thing, a taste of copper in my mouth. I pulled up to the imposing iron gate of Blackwood Ranch, feeling small, exposed, and terrified. I killed the engine. I needed this. The front door was unlocked, just as the text message had said. I stepped inside, and the silence of the house hit me harder than the cold outside. It smelled of cedar, lemon polish, and expensive isolation. The foyer was cavernous, with dark wood floors that looked like they hadn't seen a scuff mark in a century. I stood there, clutching my bag against my stomach, rehearsing the speech I'd practiced in the rearview mirror. I'm reliable. I'm thorough. I don't mind the distance. I needed to sound like a professional, not a single mother drowning in debt. I checked my watch. 2 minutes early. I smoothed the front of my shirt, wishing I had something that looked less worn, less tired. Then I heard it. The heavy, deliberate sound of boots on hardwood. I straightened my spine, putting on my interview face, the one that said I was capable and uncomplicated. The footsteps stopped. A shadow fell across the entryway floor. I looked up, ready to smile, ready to beg without looking like I was begging. The air left the room. It wasn't a stranger. It was Emma. For a second, my brain refused to process the visual data. It tried to reject the reality standing 10 feet away from me. But the recognition was visceral, immediate, and violent. It was Emma, but not the girl I had left 15 years ago. This was a woman. Her shoulders were broader, filling out a canvas work jacket that looked worn at the elbows. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot, exposing the sharp line of her jaw. She was wiping grease from her hands with a gray rag, her movements slow, methodical. My stomach dropped, a sensation like missing a step in the dark. My mouth went instantly dry. The urge to run battled the absolute necessity of the paycheck. I wanted to turn around, walk out the door, and drive until the gas tank ran dry. But I couldn't. I was frozen, pinned in place by the sudden, suffocating weight of the past. Emma stopped wiping her hands. She didn't smile. There was no flicker of polite greeting, no social nicety to smooth over the shock. She just looked at me. Her gaze was dark, unreadable, and intense. She assessed me the way a rancher assesses a broken fence line, calculating the damage, estimating the cost of repair, deciding if it was worth the effort. "Sarah," she said. The sound of my name in her voice was a physical blow. It was deeper than I remembered, rougher, like it had been dragged over gravel. "Emma," I managed to choke out. My voice sounded thin, pathetic in the large space. The agency sent me for the cleaning position." She didn't blink. She tossed the rag onto a side table, the fabric landing with a soft thud. She took a step closer, and I had to fight the instinct to step back. "I know who sent you," she said. "I didn't know it was you." "I didn't know this was your place," I said quickly, too quickly. "If I had known, you wouldn't have come," she finished for me. Her eyes tracked over my face, cataloging the changes. I wondered what she saw. The fine lines around my eyes, the tension in my jaw, the cheap coat. "You're here now. I need the work," I said. The admission burned, but I didn't have the luxury of pride. "I'm good at this. I'm fast. I don't care about that," she interrupted. She crossed her arms over her chest, the canvas jacket shifting with the movement. She looked permanent, anchored like a part of the landscape itself. "The agency says you're cleared. That's enough." "You don't want references?" I asked, confused. "I know your references," she said, her voice flat. "I know you finish what you start. Usually." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and unspoken. Usually. Except for us. Except for the time I left without saying goodbye. "The pay is $25 an hour," she said, turning slightly away, breaking the eye contact that was starting to make my skin burn. 3 days a week. Cash if you want it. It was more than the agency had listed. It was enough to fix the boots. Enough to pay the rent.
I'll take it, I said.
Emma nodded once, a sharp jerk of her chin. She didn't offer her hand. She didn't welcome me. She just looked at the floor for a second, then back at me, her expression hardening.
Start in the kitchen, she said. I'll be in the barn.
She walked past me, and I smelled it. Rain, horses, and the faint, distinct scent of her skin that I hadn't realized I still remembered. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I was trapped. I had the job, but the cost was going to be so much higher than I had calculated. The physical labor was a mercy. It gave my hands something to do, something to destroy and make clean again. I started in the great room, on my knees, scrubbing the wide plank pine floors with a bristle brush. The wood was old, scarred by decades of boots and dog claws, and the dirt was ingrained deep in the grain. I scrubbed until the water in my bucket turned the color of slate, until the muscles in my shoulders began to burn with a dull, rhythmic throb. It was a grounding pain. It pulled me out of my head and into my body, forcing me to focus on the friction of bristles against timber, rather than the woman sitting 20 feet away. Emma hadn't returned to the barn. She had set up a temporary workspace at the heavy oak dining table, surrounded by stacks of invoices and a laptop that hummed with a low fluorescent whine. She was cleaning a piece of tack, a complex bridle with silver conchos, while she read the screen. I tried to keep my eyes on the floor, on the soapy water spreading across the pine, but my gaze kept betraying me. It drifted upward, catching the movement of her hands. They were capable hands. I remembered that about her. I remembered the way she used to fix the engine of her old truck, grease under her fingernails, her knuckles scraped and bleeding. Now, her hands were cleaner, but they were still rough, the skin weathered by wind and work. I watched her thumb rub oil into the leather, a slow, circular motion that made my breath hitch in my throat. She paused to type something on the keyboard, her movements sharp and decisive, then went back to the leather. There was a scar running across the back of her left hand, a jagged white line I didn't recognize. It was new history, a story I didn't know. It bothered me more than it should have. The air in the room was thick. The only sounds were the shh, shh of my brush and the occasional click of her keyboard. Every time I shifted my weight, the floorboards groaned, a sound that felt impossibly loud. I felt exposed, kneeling there in my faded jeans and oversized t-shirt, scrubbing her floor while she ran her empire. I reached the dining area. The massive table where she sat was heavy, solid oak, the kind of furniture that anchored a room. I needed to clean beneath the far end, where the dust bunnies had gathered in the shadows. I stood up, wiping my forehead with the back of my wrist. I grabbed the edge of the table, bracing my feet. I didn't want to ask her to move. I didn't want to speak to her at all. If I spoke, my voice might shake, and I couldn't afford that weakness. I shoved. The table didn't budge. It was like pushing against a mountain. I gritted my teeth, frustration flaring hot in my chest. I shifted my grip, digging my fingers into the wood, and leaned my entire body weight into the push. My boot slipped slightly on the floor. "Stop," Emma said. I froze. I hadn't heard her chair scrape back. I hadn't heard her approach. But suddenly, she was there. She didn't wait for me to move. She stepped in beside me, her body blocking the light. She gripped the edge of the table, her hand landing inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating off her, the smell of leather oil and cedar overwhelming my senses. "It's solid oak, Sarah," she said, her voice low, vibrating near my ear. "You'll throw your back out." "I've got it," I snapped, the words coming out sharper than I intended. I tried to pull away, but I was trapped between the wall and her solidity. "Don't be an idiot," she murmured. "On 3, lift and shift. 1, 2, 3. We moved in unison. It was instinct, a muscle memory from a lifetime ago when we used to move hay bales together. We lifted the heavy wood, shifting it 2 feet to the left. The effort was brief, but the coordination was seamless. As we set it down, the table leg hit the floor with a heavy thud. My hand slipped on the polished wood, sliding sideways. It collided with hers. For a second, just one terrified, suspended second, our skin touched. Her hand was warm, the callus on her palm scraping against my knuckles. It wasn't a gentle brush. It was a collision of friction and heat. A spark, violent and undeniable, shot up my arm and settled in the pit of my stomach. It was a physical shock, like grabbing a live wire. I flinched back as if she had burned me. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Emma didn't move. She didn't pull her hand away. She left it there, on the table, fingers spread against the dark wood, looking at where my hand had been. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide. She didn't apologize. She didn't make a joke to diffuse the tension. She just looked at me, her gaze dropping to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. It was an unflinching assessment, stripping away the years, the anger, the silence. I started, but I didn't have any words. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that I was sure she could hear. "You missed a spot," she said quietly, gesturing to the floor where the table had been. She turned and walked away, back to her papers, back to the safety of the distance she had constructed. But the air in the room had changed. The charge was still there, static on my skin. I finished the floor with trembling hands. I didn't look at her again. When the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 5, I poured the dirty water down the utility sink, grabbed my bag, and practically ran to the door. I needed air. I needed rain. I needed to be anywhere but in that room, where the ghost of what we used to be was suddenly, terrifyingly, taking on flesh and blood. Thursday brought the rain again, a relentless, drumming gray that turned the ranch roads into slick, impassable rivers of mud. The main house felt too large, too empty, so when Emma told me to clear out the tack room in the main barn, I took the assignment as a mercy. I needed a smaller world. I needed walls I could touch. The barn was a cathedral of shadows and dust, smelling of sweet feed, cured hay, and the sharp, pungent scent of oiled leather. It was a primal smell, heavy and grounding. The tack room was narrow, a long corridor lined with saddle racks and hooks draped with bridles. I was deep in the back, polishing a silver bit until my own distorted reflection stared back at me. The rhythm of the work was hypnotic. Wipe, buff, check, repeat. It was the kind of mindless labor that usually let me drift, but today, the air in the barn was too charged for drifting. Emma was there. She was in the cross ties just outside the open tack room door, grooming a nervous sorrel mare. The horse was young, green-broke and skittish, her ears pinning back at the sound of the rain hammering the tin roof. I tried to focus on the bit in my hands, but my eyes kept sliding to the doorway. I watched Emma work. She moved with an efficiency that made my chest ache. There was no wasted energy in her. She used a stiff brush on the mare's flank, her strokes long and firm, her body swaying slightly with the effort. She was wearing a gray t-shirt that was damp with humidity, clinging to the muscles of her back as she reached up to check the mare's withers. It was the competence that got to me. It always had. I remembered being 17, watching her fix a broken fence post in the blistering heat, thinking that she could fix anything. I watched her hands now, soothing, checking, confident, and I had to look away, focusing hard on a fraying stitch in the leather I was holding. Everything happened at once. A barn cat, seeking shelter from the downpour, knocked a metal bucket off a shelf in the loft above. The clang was deafening in the enclosed space. The sorrel mare exploded. She reared back, her iron shoes sparking against the concrete aisle, the cross ties snapping tight with a sickening crack. One of the safety clips gave way. The horse scrambled, hooves slipping, swinging her heavy hindquarters around in a panic, threatening to crush Emma against the stall door. I didn't think. The instinct was older than the fear, older than the 15 years of silence between us. I dropped the bridle and lunged forward. "Hey, easy!" I shouted, grabbing the trailing lead rope just as the mare tried to bolt toward the open barn doors. I dug the heels of my boots into the dirt floor, throwing my weight back. The rope burned through my palm, but I held on, feeling the massive, terrified power of the animal jerking my shoulder almost out of its socket. The mare spun, confused and dangerous, pinning me between her shoulder and the wall of the tack room. I had nowhere to go. I was trapped in the narrow space, the horse's heavy breathing hot in my face, her hoof striking the wood inches from my shin. Then Emma was there. She didn't pull me away. There wasn't room. Instead, she moved to stabilize the horse, needing to reach the halter to pull the mare's head down. To do it, she had to come through me. She pressed her body against my back. It wasn't a gentle collision. It was a hard, desperate impact. She slammed into me, pinning me against the wall to create a leverage point. Her chest was flush against my spine, her hips locking against mine to keep us both from being trampled. I could feel every inch of her, the solid, unyielding heat of her torso, the damp fabric of her shirt, the frantic thud of her heart hammering against my own ribs. She reached over my shoulder, her arm brushing my cheek, her hand gripping the mare's halter with a strength that terrified me. "Easy," she commanded. Her voice was a low rumble, vibrating directly into my bones. Her mouth was right at my ear. I could feel the warmth of her breath on the sensitive skin of my neck, damp and heavy. "Easy, girl. You're okay. We've got you." The mare shuddered, her eyes rolling. But the dual weight of us, me holding the rope, Emma holding the halter and anchoring us both, finally grounded her. The horse stood still, blowing hard, trembling. We didn't move. The danger was over, but neither of us pulled away. Emma was still pressed against me, her body molding to mine as if we were two parts of the same structure. The contact was suffocating and intoxicating. I was surrounded by her, the smell of rain and horses, and that specific cedarwood scent of her skin that I had spent a decade trying to scrub from my memory. My legs felt weak, useless. If she hadn't been holding me up, pinning me to the wood, I might have slid to the floor. For 3 seconds, the world narrowed down to the point of contact between our bodies. I felt her thigh against the back of my leg, solid and taut. I felt the rise and fall of her chest against my shoulder blades. I wanted to lean back. God, I wanted to lean back. I wanted to let my head fall against her shoulder and close my eyes and pretend that I hadn't ruined everything, that we were just Emma and Sarah in the barn, waiting out the rain. "Sarah," she breathed. It wasn't a question. It was a ragged exhale against my neck, her lips grazing the skin below my ear. Then the mare shifted, shaking her head, the brass on her halter jingling. The spell shattered. Emma stepped back abruptly, as if the gravity in the room had reversed. The loss of her heat was instant and physical, leaving my back cold and exposed. I stumbled forward slightly, catching my balance on the wall, my breath coming in shallow gasps. She's okay now," Emma said. Her voice was rough, stripped of the command she'd had a moment ago. She didn't look at me. She was focused entirely on the horse, checking the halter, running her hands over the mare's neck, doing anything to avoid acknowledging what had just happened. "I'll get back to the tack," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, shaky. I retreated into the shadows of the tack room, my hands trembling so badly I could barely pick up the rag. I scrubbed at a spot on the saddle that was already clean, trying to slow my heart rate, trying to forget the feeling of her body pressed against mine. But the imprint of her was burned into my skin, a ghost sensation that the cold damp of the barn couldn't wash away. The rain didn't let up. It shifted gears, transforming from a steady rhythm into a violent, hammering assault that turned the world outside the windows into a blur of gray wash. I had tried to leave. I had made it as far as the cattle guard at the end of the long drive, but the creek had breached its banks. The road was gone, replaced by a churning, brown torrent of water that carried broken branches and debris. I had sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at the flood, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached, calculating the depth, calculating the risk. But I knew better. I wasn't reckless anymore. I had Mia to think about. I couldn't drown in a wash just because I was afraid of a woman. I reversed the car. The drive back to the main house felt like a surrender. When I stepped back into the foyer, the lights flickered once, a frantic, buzzing strobe, and then died. The house plunged into a heavy, suffocating gloom. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the relentless drumming on the roof. It felt like the house had held its breath, and was waiting for us to exhale. Emma was in the living room. She didn't look surprised to see me back. She was kneeling by the massive stone fireplace, stacking kindling with that same maddening precision she applied to everything. "Road's washed out," she said, not looking up. She struck a match. The flare of sulfur was sharp in the damp air. "Yeah," I said. I stayed near the doorway, hugging my arms across my chest. I was shivering, a reaction to the adrenaline in the barn and the damp chill that had seeped into the house. "I can't get out," I figured. She watched the flame catch the dry cedar kindling. "Generator's down. We'll have to wait it out." The domesticity of it was a physical ache. Watching her crouch there, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows against the walls, felt too familiar. It reminded me of the apartment we had talked about getting in the city, the one with the fireplace we would never use because we'd be too busy living. But we weren't living. We were surviving, in the dark, trapped in a house that smelled of old money and unsaid things. She stood up, dusting her hands on her jeans. She walked to the liquor cabinet, the movement fluid in the half-light. Glass clinked against glass. The sound was loud, deliberate. "You look like you're going to shatter," she said. She turned, holding 2 tumblers. "Drink this." I walked forward because my legs were tired of standing still. I took the glass. It was heavy crystal, etched with patterns I couldn't see clearly in the dark. The smell of whiskey hit me, peat and smoke. "I have to drive," I said automatically. The responsible answer. The mother's answer. "You're not driving anywhere tonight, Sarah. Look outside." I looked. The window was a sheet of black water. She was right. I took a sip. The liquid burned going down, a welcome heat that settled in my chest, warring with the cold knot of anxiety. I went to take another sip, but my hand betrayed me. The tremor started in my wrist, a fine, uncontrollable shaking that made the ice cubes rattle against the glass. Clink, clink, clink. The sound was pathetic, a telegraph of my fear. I tried to steady it, gripping the glass harder, but that only made the tension worse. I stared at the amber liquid, willing it to be still, hating my body for being so transparent. Emma set her glass down on the low coffee table. She didn't say anything. She didn't tell me to calm down. She stepped into my space, the firelight catching the sharp angle of her cheekbone. She reached out. She didn't take the glass. She placed her hand over mine. It wasn't a hold. It wasn't a caress. It was a clamp. Her palm covered the back of my hand, her fingers curling around my wrist, pressing my hand down onto the table surface. She trapped my tremor under the sheer weight of her grip. Her skin was hot, dry, and rough. The pressure was grounding, absolute. She held me there, pinned against the wood, until the rattling stopped, until the only vibration left was the thudding of my own pulse against her thumb. We stood there, bent over the table, the fire crackling behind us. I couldn't look at her. I looked at our hands, hers dark and scarred, mine pale and trembling beneath it. "Why are you really here, Sarah?" The question was soft, but it landed like an accusation. "I told you," I whispered, staring at the knot of her knuckles. "I need the money." There are other jobs. Easier jobs. Jobs where you don't have to drive an hour into the middle of nowhere. Her thumb pressed into the tendon of my wrist, finding the beat of my heart. "You didn't know it was me. I believe that. But you stayed. You're still here." "I can't leave," I said. The road was open 3 hours ago," she said. "When you first got here. When you saw me." I didn't have an answer for that. Or I did, and it was too dangerous to speak. I stayed because running felt harder than staying. I stayed because the terrifying gravity of her was the only thing that felt real in a world that had become a series of unpaid bills and lonely nights. She slowly lifted her hand. The loss of pressure made me feel lightheaded, untethered. "Sit down," she said, picking up her drink again. "The storm isn't going anywhere." The whiskey did exactly what I feared it would. It didn't just warm my blood. It dissolved the thin, brittle mortar holding my defenses together. The silence between us stretched, no longer empty, but heavy with 15 years of unsaid things. I watched the firelight play across Emma's face, highlighting the sharp line of her jaw and the darkness of her eyes. She looked expensive. She looked successful. She looked like she had never known a moment of the crushing panic that woke me up at 3 a.m. every single night. The unfairness of it rose up in my throat, bitter as bile. You don't get to look at me like that, I said. My voice was steady, grounded by the alcohol. Like I'm some tragedy you're trying to figure out. Emma turned the glass in her hand, the amber liquid tilting. I'm not looking at you like a tragedy, Sarah. I'm looking at you like a stranger. That's what you wanted, isn't it? The words were out before I could check them. The anger was a live thing now, uncoiling in my chest. You got out. You went to the city, built your empire, and forgot about the girl who was too scared to leave. Emma set her glass down. The clack against the wood was sharp. Final. She turned her body fully toward me, and the casual slouch was gone. She was taut, a coiled spring. Is that the story you tell yourself? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. That I just forgot? That I walked away and never looked back? I never heard from you, I snapped. Not once. You left for college in September, and I was a ghost to you by October. I wrote you every week for a year. The sentence hung in the air, suspended in the smoke and heat. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the lie. But Emma didn't lie. She never had. My parents, I whispered. It wasn't a question. Your father told me if I contacted you again, he'd make sure I lost my scholarship, Emma said. Her face was impassive, but her hands were clenched into fists on her knees. I didn't care about the scholarship. But then he said he'd kick you out. He said you were 18, and if you wanted to be a deviant, you could do it on the street. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew my father was hard. I knew he was cruel. But the specific, calculated weight of that threat made my stomach turn. I tried to wait, Emma continued, her voice rougher now. I thought if I gave it time, if I got established. I came back, Sarah. 3 years later. I drove past your house. I was gone, I said dully. I was married. I saw, she said. I saw the ring. I saw you getting into his truck. You looked safe. Safe, I spat the word out. I was surviving. I was doing what I had to do because I was alone. You weren't supposed to be alone! Emma's voice rose, cracking the stillness. She stood up, the movement abrupt and violent. We had a plan. We had a map. We were going to the coast. We were going to live in a place with big windows and no curtains. Plans change, I said, standing up too. I couldn't sit there anymore. The heat of the fire was suffocating. I needed to move. I needed to leave. I'm going to sleep in the truck. I turned toward the hallway, toward the door that led to the cold, wet reality of the storm. I made it 2 steps. Emma moved faster. She didn't grab me. She didn't touch me. She simply intercepted my path, stepping between me and the doorway. She planted her feet, blocking the exit with her body. She wasn't threatening, but she was immovable. She loomed over me, her height suddenly overwhelming. Move, Emma, I said, staring at the center of her chest, at the silver button of her shirt. No. I am your employee, I said, trying to summon the professional barrier that had disintegrated hours ago. Let me pass. You're not my employee right now, she said. Look at me. I refused. I focused on a knot in the pine floorboard near her boot. If I looked at her, if I really looked at her, I would break. The grief I had been carrying for a decade would spill out, and I wouldn't be able to put it back. Sarah. Her voice dropped, vibrating with a command that bypassed my brain and hit my nervous system. Look at me. She took a step closer. She invaded my personal space, crossing the invisible line I had drawn for my own survival. I could feel the heat radiating from her body, a physical force pushing against my coldness. I looked up. Her gaze was unflinching. It was raw, stripped of all the armor she usually wore. There was anger there, yes, but beneath it was a hunger that terrified me. Why did you buy this place? I whispered, the question slipping out. It's too big for one person. It's too far from the city. It doesn't make sense. Emma didn't look away. She held my gaze, trapping me in the intensity of it. The windows, she said softly. Look at the windows in the great room, Sarah. Floor to ceiling. Facing west. My breath hitched. The memory hit me. A sketch I had drawn on a paper napkin in a diner when we were 17. Big windows, I had said, so we can see the storms coming. I didn't buy it for me, she said, the truth landing between us like a physical weight. I bought it because it was the only place I found that looked like the home you wanted. The morning sun didn't bring clarity. It brought a headache, and a terrifying, bright exposure. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a hard, brilliant blue that hurt my eyes. But the atmosphere inside the house hadn't cleared. It had thickened. The air felt pressurized, solid enough to bruise. We hadn't spoken since the living room. We had retreated to separate corners of the sprawling house, Emma to her office, me to the guest room I'd been forced to occupy. But the silence wasn't empty. It was vibrating, a high-frequency hum of unresolved history that made my teeth ache. I needed to work. I needed the physical punishment of labor to quiet the noise in my head. I chose the library, a room with ceilings that soared 20 feet high and a wall of transom windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. It was a task that required focus, balance, and exhaustion. Perfect. I dragged the heavy wooden A-frame ladder into position. It was old, splattered with decades of paint, and it groaned as I set it up on the uneven floorboards. I climbed slowly, my boots thudding against the rungs, clutching a bucket of vinegar water and a squeegee. At the top, the air was stale and hot. I was 15 feet up, suspended in the dust motes. I started scrubbing. The grime was stubborn, baked on by the sun. I had to lean out, stretching my arm until the tendon in my shoulder popped, trying to reach the far corner of the glass. My center of gravity shifted. The ladder leg kicked out. It was a small movement, a shift of maybe an inch. But at that height, it felt like the earth had dropped away. The ladder wobbled violently. I gasped, dropping the squeegee. It clattered to the floor far below, and grabbed the top of the frame with both hands, my heart slamming into my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the fall, waiting for the crash. It didn't come. The ladder stopped moving instantly, anchored by a sudden, massive weight at the base. I've got you. Emma's voice came from below, strained and sharp. Come down, now! I opened my eyes. I couldn't look down. I just focused on my hands, white-knuckled on the wood, and began the descent. 1 step. 2. My knees were water. I was shaking so hard the ladder vibrated with it. When I reached the bottom rung, I didn't step onto the floor. I stepped into her space. Emma was there, her hands gripping the ladder rails so hard her knuckles were bleached white. As soon as my boots hit the wood, she let go of the ladder. She grabbed me. It wasn't a steadying hand on the shoulder. It was a collision. She gripped my waist, her hands heavy and hot through my shirt, and she didn't just stabilize me. She pulled me in. She pulled me flush against her, hard, collapsing the distance between us until there was no air left. I should have pushed her away. I should have stepped back and apologized for the slip. But my body betrayed me. My hands found her shoulders, clutching the fabric of her shirt to keep from falling, and I let her take my weight. She buried her face in the curve of my neck. It wasn't a kiss. It was something more desperate, more primal. It was a starving thing seeking sustenance. I felt her breath, ragged and hot, against my sensitive skin. I felt the roughness of her cheek. I felt the solid, unyielding wall of her chest pressing against mine, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm that matched my own. God, she whispered against my skin. The word was a prayer and a curse. I hate this. I hate this house. I froze, my fingers curling into the collar of her shirt. Emma, I breathed. It's just noise, Sarah, she murmured, her voice vibrating through my sternum. The money, the contracts, the ranch, it's all just noise without you. It's just empty space. Her hand slid around to the small of my back, locking me against her. The pressure was possessive, absolute. She smelled of coffee and cedar and that underlying electric heat that I had spent 15 years trying to forget. I was drowning in it. The fear of the bills, the fear of the future, the fear of my father, it all dissolved, burned away by the sheer proximity of her. I wanted this. I wanted it more than I wanted to be safe. My hands moved up her neck, sliding into the hair at the nape of her neck. It was soft, just like I remembered. I tilted my head back, opening the line of my throat to her, surrendering. I was going to kiss her. I was going to let this happen, consequences be damned. Ring! The sound shattered the world. It was my cell phone, vibrating violently against the floor where I'd left it in my bag. The ringtone was bright, cheerful, and utterly terrifying.
It was the school's number.
I ripped myself away. It was a physical tearing, a violent separation of two things that had been fused by heat and pressure. I stumbled back, gasping, the air rushing into my lungs, cold and thin compared to the atmosphere I had just been breathing. I scrambled for my bag, my fingers fumbling over the leather, shaking so hard I could barely grip the zipper. "Sarah," Emma said. Her voice was wrecked, a rough sound that tried to bridge the sudden gap between us. She reached out, her hand hovering in the empty space where my waist had been a second ago. I ignored her. I couldn't look at her. If I looked at her mouth swollen and red, at her eyes blown wide with the same terrifying want that was currently eating me alive, I wouldn't answer the phone. And I had to answer the phone. That was the rule. That was the tether that kept me from floating away into the dangerous, impossible fantasy of this house. I tapped the green icon. "Hello?" My voice was brittle, cracking on the second syllable. "Mrs. Miller? This is the nurse at Lincoln Elementary." The reality of the world crashed back in. The library walls seemed to shrink, the grand windows becoming just glass, the dust just dirt. "Is she okay?" I asked, turning my back on Emma, pressing the phone hard against my ear as if I could physically block out the presence behind me. "She's running a fever of 102, the nurse said, her voice calm, bureaucratic. "She's asking for you. You need to come pick her up." "I'm on my way," I said. "I'm leaving right now." I ended the call. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. I shoved the phone into my pocket and turned around. Emma was still standing by the ladder. Her hands were at her sides now, clenched into fists. She looked like someone who had just watched a structure collapse. "Mia's sick," I said. I didn't offer details. I didn't owe her details. I needed to keep the world separate. "I have to go." "Sarah," she started again. "I can't," I cut her off. The panic was rising in my throat, a bitter tide. "I can't do this, Emma. I can't be here. I have a daughter. I have a life." "I know you have a life," she said, stepping forward. "I'm not asking you to give it up. I'm asking you to let me into it." "You don't fit," I said, backing away toward the heavy oak doors. "Look at this place. Look at you. You don't fit in a 2-bedroom walk-up with a leaking radiator. You don't fit in a life where I have to choose between winter boots and the electric bill." "I don't care about the boots," she shouted, the control finally snapping. "I do," I screamed back, the sound tearing at my throat. "I have to. That's the difference, Emma. You have the luxury of not caring. I don't." I turned and ran. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't wait to see if she would follow. I grabbed my coat from the foyer and bolted out the front door, into the blinding sun and the mud. The drive to the school was a blur of white knuckles and shallow breathing. My body felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. It was a map of sensory memories. The ghost of her hands on my waist, the phantom pressure of her chest against mine, the lingering scent of cedar and rain that seemed to have soaked into my pores. I could still feel the heat of her. It was a phantom limb sensation, an ache in a part of me I thought I had amputated years ago. I picked up Mia. She was flushed and lethargic, her small body radiating heat. I buckled her in, kissed her hot forehead, and drove us home. Home. The word felt like a lie. We walked into the apartment, and the contrast hit me like a physical blow. The air was stale, smelling of trapped laundry and the neighbor's burnt toast. The carpet was thin and stained. The pile of mail on the counter was a monument to my anxiety. I settled Mia on the couch with a blanket and a juice box, turning on her favorite cartoon. I went into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, staring at the pink notice on the fridge. Final warning. I closed my eyes, and instantly I was back in the library. I was 15 feet in the air, and Emma was catching me. I was safe. I was held. I opened my eyes. The refrigerator hummed its broken, rattling tune. This was dangerous. That feeling, that safety, was a trap. It was the most dangerous thing in the world because it wasn't real. It was a vacation from reality, and vacations ended. If I let myself want her, if I let myself need that solidity, I would get soft. I would lose the edge I needed to survive. And when she left, because everyone left, because the distance between a ranch owner and a cleaning lady was a canyon you couldn't bridge with nostalgia, I would be destroyed. And Mia would watch me drown. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My hand was shaking again, but This time, Emma wasn't there to stop it. I opened a new message. I typed her name. "I can't come back," I typed. The letters looked black and stark on the screen. "Please mail my final check to the address on file. I'm sorry." It was cowardly. It was professional. It was necessary. My thumb hovered over the send arrow. I stared at the cursor, blinking, blinking, blinking. It was a heartbeat. It was a countdown. All I had to do was press the glass, and I would be safe again. I would be alone, but I would be safe.
I couldn't do it.
I didn't send the text. But I didn't go back to the ranch either. For 2 days, I existed in a paralyzed limbo, trapped between the life I needed to leave and the life I was too terrified to claim. The apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in with the weight of my indecision. I spent the hours pacing the worn linoleum of the kitchen, checking Mia's temperature, and staring at the silent phone on the counter. The pink notice on the fridge seemed to pulse in the periphery of my vision, a constant, silent scream. Then came the knock. It wasn't the heavy, impatient pounding of the landlord looking for rent. It was 3 sharp, deliberate raps. Controlled. Precise. My stomach turned over. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I walked to the door, steeling myself for a process server or a neighbor complaining about the noise. I unlocked the deadbolt, the metal screeching in the quiet afternoon, and pulled the door open. Emma was standing in the hallway. She looked violently out of place. There she stood, stark against the peeling paint, looking like she had just stepped out of a different world. She was wearing a dark wool coat that fit her shoulders perfectly, her hands buried in the pockets. She wasn't looking at the peeling paint or the flickering fluorescent light overhead. She was looking at me. "You didn't quit," she said. Her voice was low, cutting through the hum of the building. "I didn't come back," I countered, gripping the edge of the door like a shield. "That's the same thing." "It's not." She pulled one hand from her pocket. She wasn't holding flowers. She wasn't holding a check. She was holding a thick manila envelope. "I'm not here to drag you back to scrub floors, Sarah." "Then why are you here?" "Because you're wrong," she said. "You think I don't fit here. You think this," she gestured vaguely at the grim hallway, "is something I can't handle. You think you have to protect me from your reality." She held out the envelope. "Take it." I hesitated, then reached out. The paper was heavy, substantial. "It's not a gift," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "It's a contract. Property manager. I need someone to handle the logistics, the inventory, the staff I'm hiring. It comes with a salary that covers your rent 3 times over. It comes with full family health insurance, dental, vision, a 401k. I felt the breath leave my lungs. It wasn't charity. It was stability. It was the kind of safety I had stopped believing existed. "Why?" I whispered. "Because you're the only person I trust to tell me the truth," she said. "And because I want you there. Every day." A small movement behind me caught her eye. I turned. Mia was standing in the doorway of her bedroom, wearing her faded dinosaur pajamas, clutching a blanket. She looked small and pale, her eyes wide as she studied the stranger in the hallway. "Mom?" she croaked. I tensed, waiting for Emma to flinch. Waiting for her to look at my sick child, my messy apartment, my complicated, heavy life, and realize she had made a mistake. Emma didn't flinch. She dropped to one knee. She didn't mind the dirt on the floor. She didn't check her expensive coat. She just knelt down so she was eye level with my daughter, ignoring me completely. "Hey," Emma said softly. "I like your T-Rex." Mia blinked, clutching the blanket tighter. "It's a Carnotaurus. T-Rex has 2 fingers. Carnotaurus has horns." Emma smiled, and it was the real one, the soft, unguarded smile I hadn't seen in 15 years. "I stand corrected. I'm Emma." "I'm Mia," she whispered. "Are you the lady with the horses?" "I am," Emma said. She reached out, not to touch Mia, but to point at her foot. "Your sock is twisted. That's gotta be uncomfortable." It was such a small thing, a tiny observational detail that only a mother, or someone paying absolute attention, would notice. Emma waited, and Mia stuck her foot out. Emma gently straightened the fabric, her hands capable and kind. I watched them, and the knot in my chest finally, painfully, began to unravel. The fear hadn't been about the money. It hadn't been about the job. It was this. It was the terror of being loved this intensely, of letting someone see the mess and having them kneel down in it without hesitation. Emma stood up, her eyes finding mine again. She didn't ask to come in. She waited. I stepped back, pulling the door wide open. "Come in," I said. "Please." Spring came to the valley not as a gentle awakening, but as a sudden, vibrant explosion of green that swallowed the gray mud of winter. 3 months had passed since the day Emma knelt on my stained carpet, and the rhythm of my life had shifted entirely. I wasn't scrubbing floors anymore. I was standing on the wraparound porch of the main house, holding a mug of coffee that was still too hot to drink, watching the morning mist burn off the pasture. The ranch sounded different now. It wasn't just the wind and the creaking wood of empty buildings. It was alive. I could hear the low rumble of the tractor in the south field where the new hands were repairing the irrigation line, a project I had approved yesterday. I could hear the sharp, rhythmic clip-clop of hooves on hard-packed dirt. And, most clearly, I could hear Mia. She was down by the paddock fence, wearing brand-new muck boots that didn't have holes in the soles. She was laughing, a bright, uninhibited sound that carried on the clear air. She was throwing a tennis ball for the barn dog, a scruffy heeler that had adopted her with a fierce loyalty. Watching her, I felt a phantom tightness in my chest, the old reflex of anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But the shoe didn't drop. The rent was paid, the fridge was full, the silence in my head wasn't screaming about survival anymore. It was just quiet. I heard the screen door creak behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew the weight of those footsteps. I knew the specific cadence of Emma's walk, the heavy, grounded stride of someone who claimed the space she occupied. She stepped up behind me. She didn't speak. She just moved into my space, collapsing the distance until her chest was pressed against my back. It wasn't the accidental collision of the barn, or the desperate, terrified clutching in the library. This was deliberate. It was ownership. Her arm slid around my waist, locking in front of my stomach. She pulled me back against her, hard, anchoring me to her solidity. I let my head fall back against her shoulder, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I was 17. She smelled of saddle soap and fresh coffee, a scent that had become the definition of safety for me. "You're up early," she murmured, her voice rough with sleep, vibrating against my shoulder blade. "Inventory day," I said, though I made no move to leave the circle of her arms. "We need to order more grain before the weekend." "The grain can wait," she said. She buried her face in the crook of my neck, her lips grazing the sensitive skin there. "The sun is just coming up." I closed my eyes, focusing on the sensation of her hands on me. Her thumbs were rubbing slow, soothing circles against my ribs through my sweater. It was a possessive touch, heavy and certain. It was the touch of someone who wasn't going anywhere, who had planted her feet in the dirt and refused to move. "Mia loves the dog," I said softly. "The dog loves her," Emma corrected. She shifted slightly, turning me in her arms until I was facing her. The morning light caught her face, illuminating the fine lines around her eyes, the scar on her chin, the truth of her. She wasn't a memory anymore. She wasn't a ghost haunting a high school parking lot. She was real, flesh and blood, standing in front of me with an expression so open, so undefended, that it made my heart ache. She raised a hand, cupping my jaw, her thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. Her gaze was unflinching, stripping away the last of my defenses. "Are you happy?" she asked. The same question she had asked in the coffee shop months ago. "I'm not scared," I answered. And that was the truer thing. Happiness was fleeting. This lack of fear was structural. It was a foundation. Emma smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her mouth. "Good." She leaned in. The kiss wasn't tentative. It tasted of coffee and the future. It was slow, deep, and deliberate, a claiming. I tangled my fingers in her hair, pulling her closer, needing to feel the friction of her body against mine. There was no hesitation now, no frantic calculation of consequences. There was just the heat of her, the solid ground beneath our feet, and the absolute certainty that I was finally, terrifyingly, exactly where I was supposed to be. I leaned back into the warmth of her chest, watching the dust motes dance in the golden light spreading across the valley. The fear was still there, a faint scar on my history, but it was quiet now, drowned out by the sound of a shared life. I realized I hadn't just found a job. I had found the place where I finally stopped holding my breath. If you've ever found home in a person you thought you lost, subscribe for more stories.